Skyrim, Todd's magnum opus, a game that has been ported to every console imaginable, including your mom's smart toaster. A game known for its memes, a game that disguises its bugs as features, and a game that has the best big booba mods on the internet, where you can truly get the experience of playing as a big booba goth girl. But most important of all, Skyrim is a game that has managed to keep its relevance over the years, as this game still gets an average of around about 25,000 players each and every day, which is impressive for a game that is 13 years old. But is Skyrim really that good? Does it still hold up today? And more importantly, is Skyrim the most Sigma of the Elder Scrolls games? And to answer that question, we can start at the story, where you kick Skyrim off by creating your character. And to stay on theme, I decided to create a Nordic character and make him look as Sigma as possible, which is actually very easy to do. Once you have created your Sigma Chad, it is time to give him a very Sigma name, and I decided to give him a Sigma Nordic name, that being Sigma Jornsson. And now he is ready to become the Sigma born. Now, jokes aside, I think the story of Skyrim is pretty okay. It is not the best story you will ever hear. It is not the greatest story ever told in video gaming history, and fundamentally has some problems, but I do think that overall the story is okay. One of my biggest issues related to the story is probably related to the choices, as most of the choices are really not that interesting and really not that impactful. Unlike a game like Fallout New Vegas, where most of your choices feel like they actually have some impact on the world, the choices in Skyrim feel very bland and basic. I also feel like most of the characters in this game are just as bland and basic. None of them are really that interesting, and you don't really get to learn about much of the main characters at all throughout the course of the game, making most of the characters feel very one-dimensional. However, Skyrim is a game that thrives with its lore. Its lore is deep and very interesting, which is probably why most people just ignore the main story and focus on the side quests, because realistically they are much more interesting and help you discover more interesting facts about the world of Skyrim. Look, I'm not saying that Skyrim's story is the worst story on planet Earth. It is pretty fine, but I do think that there are games that does a much better job at telling a story. A certain game like Fallout New Vegas is a perfect example of a game doing a much better job at telling a story. Now, there is quite a lot to discuss when it comes to Skyrim's gameplay, so let's start with the combat. There is a lot of variety when it comes to the combat of Skyrim, and it gives you the freedom to play the way you want to. You can be a stealthy archer, a beta mage, or a Sigma axe-wielding badass, which is the most Sigma way to play this game. And there is way more variety when it comes to the weapons and the types of weapons for each playstyle, which makes this game so very epic, as well as the types of armors and unique weapons and armors that you can find in this game that really adds to the variety in the combat system. And probably the best variety when it comes to the combat system is in regards to the enemies, as this game gives you a shit ton of different enemy types, which is always a damn good thing. There are so many different enemies in this game, ranging from basic bitches to actual badass enemies to fight, and none is more badass than the dragons in this game, which play a very important part in regards to both the combat and the story. However, fighting one of these dragons is one of the most epic experiences that I have ever felt when playing games. Hearing a distant roar of a dragon slowly approaching, seeing its shadow, and then seeing a dragon coming down to face you in an epic battle is pretty darn Sigma. And I can say this about many of the other enemies in this game as well. Even though they are probably not as epic to fight as the dragons, there are still a whole lot of examples of great enemies to fight in this game, which I think is always a good element for your game to have. However, we have to address the elephant in the room when it comes to Skyrim's combat, and that is the feeling of the combat itself. I think the base combat in Skyrim feels clunky, floaty, and, well, unfortunately outdated. Now, I don't want you to think that I think that the combat system is utterly shit, because that's quite frankly not true. I still think that there is some good detail and some feeling of, well, decency within the combat system, but unfortunately I think the biggest problem with the combat system is that it just didn't age very well, which is a little bit unfortunate and does mean that I have to subtract some Sigma points. However, there are still a lot of elements in this game's combat that still makes it feel good, even though I do personally think there are quite a few people that will not be able to enjoy the combat system without some mods. mods, which they are more than enough for you to download. However, further elements of the gameplay is pretty awesome in this game. One of the best gameplay elements of this game is the skill tree, as the skill tree in Skyrim is 100% Sigma. You see, everything in this game has a skill tree with perks that can improve said skill. Skills like stealth, one-handed weaponry, archery, blacksmithing, and being Sigma. All of these things have skill trees connected to them, and the way you improve upon these skills is by actually doing the stuff, which I think is pretty awesome. Now, there are of course other gameplay mechanics like being able to transform into a werewolf and a vampire, which is just thrown into the game very casually and is pretty awesome. However, one of the coolest gameplay mechanics in this game probably has to go to the shouts. You all know them and we all love them. These shouts are very epic and they range from shouting fire at people, shouting ice at people, shouting armor onto your body, or you can shout for your fantasy Uber to come pick you up, which is just a massive dragon that will take you to your destination. Very cool. Now, in order to unlock these shouts, you need a dragon soul, and these dragon souls of course can be found by killing dragons. However, the shouts itself are found by exploring the world, which neatly brings me on to the next and probably the best element of this game, the exploration. Before we had Breath of the Wild, before we had Elden Ring, we had Skyrim. The exploration in Skyrim is fantastic. The amount of people I've heard that says that as soon as they leave Helgen, they just pick a direction and walk in that direction. And the reason you can do that is because this world is designed for exploration. There are so many things in this world that will immediately grab your attention, lure you towards it. And of course, the points of interest in this game are very well placed, as you will not take more than 10 to 20 seconds to run from one to another, making exploring so much fun. And of course, exploring wouldn't be worth it or fun if the points of interest themselves weren't fun. And of course, needless to say, Skyrim's points of interest are fantastic. The absurd amounts of dungeons and mines that all feel unique, to the dragon layers on the tops of the mountains, it all just feels so fantastic and worth it to explore, as you will mostly find very useful items, spells, and of course shouts at these points of interest. And of course, I do need to mention that certain armors will only spawn at certain levels, always giving you an incentive to explore, as there is always a chance to get some awesome new epic Sigma armors and weapons. And yes, Skyrim is also a game that has a complete underground area that you can find, and of course it did this way before Elden Ring did it. And there is quite a lot to find in this underground area, including a artificial sun and a dragon. Very cool. Needless to say, but I think the exploration in Skyrim is the best part about this game. Everything about the exploration just works and is absolutely bloody amazing. When it comes to the quest design, I don't think I have that much to say about it. The quest design is pretty good. Most quests are pretty linear, but I think the best part about these quests is how certain quest areas are deliberately placed far enough to encourage exploration, which I think is probably the best element of the quest design in Skyrim. And of course, finally, there are the visuals. And the visuals of this game are pretty amazing. It still holds up really well to this day. Of course, maybe the graphics and the animations don't, but hey, the game still looks pretty good. I also have to give some credit to the NPCs and how they fill the world with liveliness. I think the NPCs add to the world and make the world feel more authentic, which is pretty impressive given how shit the NPCs are in Starfield. So where does that leave us in regards to Skyrim? Is Skyrim the most Sigma of the Elder Scrolls games? That is a very tough question to answer, and is most certainly gonna depend on person to person. People who grew up with Morrowind or played it as their first Elder Scrolls game might have a strong connection to that game and might think that it is the best of the Elder Scrolls games, and the same can be said for Oblivion and of course Skyrim. However, when it comes to whether or not Skyrim is still worth playing today, I would say the answer is absolutely yes. Sure, Skyrim has its flaws, but it is a flawed masterpiece and absolutely still without a doubt a fantastic game. That is all for this video. If you have made it this far in the video and you enjoyed the video, I would ask you to please consider liking and subscribing if you want to see more. That is it. I thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.